Cannibalism, or anthropophagy, is the ingestion of human flesh by humans. Nothing makes our skin crawl like cannibalism. It strikes the human conscience like few other taboo acts, eliciting a mix of dread, disdain, and nausea. The reality is that it has been practiced throughout all of human history for a variety of reasons, including starvation, ritualistic ceremonies, and mere pragmatism. It tests the boundaries of what is or is not acceptable human behavior and what does and does not constitute a mental disorder. Human bones that have been defleshed by other humans go back 600,000 years. The last common ancestor between Neanderthals and modern humans relied on cannibalism regularly, even when other food sources were available. These humans would sometimes hold cannibal feasts where the flesh of their rivals was eaten. The oldest Homo sapiens bones found show signs of this as well. The earliest anatomically modern humans practiced cannibalism as a funeral rite and to discourage predation in human settlements. Cannibalism is common in war. It was reported by Flavius Josephus during the siege of Jerusalem by Rome in 70 AD. Josephus tells the story of Mary of Bethsaida. Distinguished in family and fortune, her property, treasures, and food had been plundered by the Jewish defenders of the city during the siege. Famine was, quote, eating her heart out, and rage consuming her still faster. Maddened by hunger, she took the infant at her breast and said to him, "Poor little mite, in war, famine, and civil strife, why should I keep you alive? With the Romans there is only slavery, and that only if alive when they come, but famine is forestalling slavery, and the partisans are crueler than either. Come, you must be food for me, to the partisans' avenging spirit, and to the world a tale, the only thing left to fill up the measure of Jewish misery." She killed her son, then roasted him and ate one half, hiding the rest. The siege of Murat, which occurred in late 1098 in what is modern-day Syria during the First Crusade, is infamous for the claims of widespread cannibalism displayed by the Crusaders. Murat was not as rich as the Crusaders had hoped, and they were still short of supplies and food as December progressed. While the leaders negotiated away from the city, some of the starving Crusaders reportedly resorted to cannibalism, feeding on the dead bodies of Muslims. A chronicler, Radulf of Caen, wrote, "Some people said that, constrained by the lack of food, they boiled pagan adults in cooking pots, impaled children on spits, and devoured them grilled." In China, during the Tang dynasty, cannibalism was supposedly resorted to by rebel forces early in the period, who were said to raid neighboring areas for victims to eat, as well as both soldiers and civilians besieged during the rebellion of An Lushan. Eating an enemy's heart and liver was also claimed to be a feature of both official punishments and private vengeance. In fact, China has a long tradition of cannibalism. While the Chinese practiced survival cannibalism, they also did as what one historian called a peculiar extension of Confucian doctrine. Cannibalism was often practiced in China for culinary appreciation. Dishes of human flesh were prepared for upper-class palates in times of both health and sickness. As late as the 19th century, it was not unusual for Chinese executioners to eat the heart and brains of criminals they killed. They also ate a portion of the human meat for health reasons, but when some extra meat was left, they sold it for profit. Practicing cannibalism for medical purposes was not uncommon in China. Since the Middle Tang dynasty, some devoted sons cut out their thighs to let their sick parents eat them. Some Chinese people were deceived into thinking that human flesh had medicinal values for ill and dying people. This superstition drove some people to bizarre murders. One man ate virgin boys to restore his sexual ability. Another sucked blood from young women to renew his youth. Human meat was also viewed as a good cure for tuberculosis. There have been some reports of cannibalism for ideological reasons during the Cultural Revolution and Great Leap Forward. In 1986 and 1988, Cheng Yi, a former Red Guard and author of Scarlet Memorial, went down to a remote village where he obtained documents detailing the cannibalism. For the first time in our long history, Chinese ate people, not because there was a famine and they were starving to death, but for political reasons. I think thousands participated in the cannibalism and at least as many hundreds were eaten. "The party knows all about it," said Cheng. According to Cheng, hundreds of children, women, and men deemed enemies of the revolution were killed and eaten by the perpetrators, with such comments as human meat apparently tastes better when broiled than boiled. There is universal agreement that some Mesoamerican people practice human sacrifice and cannibalism, but there is no scholarly consensus as to its extent. Anthropologist Marvin Harris believes that the flesh of the victims of human sacrifice was eaten by the aristocratic class because the Aztec diet was lacking in protein. While most pre-Columbian historians believe that ritual cannibalism took place in the context of human sacrifices, they do not support Harris's thesis that human flesh was ever a significant portion of the Aztec diet. Documentation of Aztec cannibalism mainly dates from the period after the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire. Bernal Diaz's The Conquest of New Spain, written in 1568, contains several accounts of cannibalism among the people the conquistadors encountered. About the city of Cholula, Diaz wrote of his shock at seeing young men in cages ready to be sacrificed and eaten. In the same work, Diaz mentions that the Cholulan and Aztec warriors were so confident of victory against the conquistadors in an upcoming battle the following day that they wished to kill us and eat our flesh, and had already prepared the pots with salt and peppers and tomatoes. About the Mesoamerican towns in general, Diaz wrote that some of the indigenous people he saw were eating human meat, just like we take cows from the butcher shops, and they have in all towns thick wooded jailhouses like cages, and in them they put many Indian men, women and boys to fatten, and being fattened they sacrificed and ate them. Diaz's testimony is corroborated by other Spanish historians who wrote about the conquest. In Spain's overseas expansion to the New World, the practice of cannibalism was observed by Christopher Columbus in the Caribbean islands, and the Caribs were greatly feared because of their practice of it. Queen Isabel of Castile had forbade the Spaniards to enslave the indigenous, but if they were guilty of cannibalism, then they could be justifiably enslaved. Cannibalism became a pretext for attacks on indigenous groups and justification for the Spanish conquest. As with most lurid tales of native cannibalism, these stories are treated with a great deal of scrutiny, as accusations of cannibalism were often used as justifications for the subjugation or destruction of so-called savages. However, there were several well-documented cultures that engage in regular eating of the dead, such as New Zealand's Maori. It was a regular practice in Maori wars, and in an 1809 incident known as the Boyd Massacre, about 66 passengers and crew of the Boyd were killed and eaten by Maori in Northland. Other islands in the Pacific were home to cultures that allowed cannibalism to some degree. In parts of Melanesia, cannibalism was still practiced in the early 20th century for a variety of reasons, including retaliation, to insult an enemy people, or to absorb the dead person's qualities. Fiji was nicknamed the Cannibal Isles by European sailors who avoided disembarking there, and one tribal chief from Fiji is said to have consumed 872 people and to have made a pile of stones to record his achievement. The starving time at Jamestown, in the colony of Virginia, was a period of starvation during the winter of 1609 to 1610. There were about 500 Jamestown residents at the beginning of the winter. However, there were only 60 people still alive when the spring arrived. There is now archaeological and written evidence for English settlers' cannibalism during the time. The late 19th century was also rife with instances of explorers and seafarers resorting to cannibalism for survival. The survivors of the sinking of the French ship Medusa in 1816 resorted to cannibalism after 4 days adrift on a raft. According to Jonathan Miles, the raft carried the survivors to the frontiers of human experience. Crazed, parched, and starved, they slaughtered mutineers, ate their dead companions, and killed the weakest. On land, the Donner Party found itself stranded by snow in a high mountain pass in California without adequate supplies during the Mexican-American War, leading to several instances of cannibalism, although some survivors disputed the accounts. Georgia Donner said that the human meat was only given to the children. Archaeological findings proved inconclusive for evidence of cannibalism. The case of R.V. Dudley and Stevens is an English case which dealt with 4 crew members of an English yacht who were cast away in a storm some 1,600 miles from the Cape of Good Hope. After several days, one of the crew, a 17-year-old cabin boy, fell unconscious due to a combination of the famine and drinking seawater. The others decided to kill him and eat him. They were picked up 4 days later. 2 of the 3 survivors were found guilty of murder. Necessity was determined to be no defense against the charge of murder. Many instances of cannibalism by necessity were recorded during World War II. During the 872-day siege of Leningrad, reports of cannibalism began to appear in the winter of 1941 to 1942, after all birds, rats, and pets were eaten by survivors. Leningrad police even formed a special division to combat cannibalism. Files report the first use of human meat as food on the 13th of December 1941. The report outlines 13 cases, which range from a mother smothering her 18-month-old baby to feed her other 3 children, to a plumber killing his wife to feed his sons and nieces. By December 1942, the police had arrested 2,105 cannibals, dividing them into 2 legal categories: corpse eating and person eating. The latter were usually shot while the former were sent to prison. Instances of person eating were significantly lower than that of corpse eating. Of the 300 people arrested in April 1942 for cannibalism, only 44 were murderers. More cases occurred in the outlying districts than the city itself. Cannibals were often unsupported women with dependent children and no previous convictions, which allowed for a certain level of clemency in legal proceedings. Cannibalism was practiced in both Nazi and Soviet POW camps. Japanese soldiers took to acts of cannibalism among their own troops, on enemy dead, as well as on Allied prisoners of war in many parts of the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. In September 1942, Japanese daily rations on New Guinea consist of 800 grams of rice and tinned meat. However, by December this had fallen to 50 grams. According to historian Yuki Tanaka, cannibalism was often a systematic activity conducted by whole squads and under the command of officers. In some cases, flesh was cut from living people. An Indian POW testified that in New Guinea, the Japanese started selecting prisoners, and every day one prisoner was taken out and killed and eaten by the soldiers. I personally saw this happen, and about 100 prisoners were eaten at this place by the Japanese. The remainder of us were taken to another spot 50 miles away where 10 prisoners died of sickness. At this place, the Japanese again started selecting prisoners to eat. Those selected were taken to a hut where their flesh was cut from their bodies while they were alive, and they were thrown into a ditch where they later died. Cannibalism was reported by the journalist Neil Davis during the Southeast Asian Wars of the 1960s and 1970s. Davis reported that Cambodian troops ritually ate portions of the slain enemy, typically the liver. However, he and many refugees also report that cannibalism was practiced non-ritually when there was no food to be found. This usually occurred when towns and villages were under Khmer Rouge control and food was strictly rationed, leading to widespread starvation. Any civilian caught participating in cannibalism would have been immediately executed. Cannibalism has also been practiced in Africa, and it is still done so in some parts of the continent. During the 1892 to 1894 war between the Congo Free State and the Swahili Arab city-states of Nyangwe and Kasongo in eastern Congo, there were reports of widespread cannibalism of the bodies of the defeated Arab combatants by the Batistella allies of Belgian commander Francis Danis. According to Danis' medical officer, Captain Hind, their town of Ngandu had at least 2,000 polished human skulls, as a solid white pavement in front of its gates with human skulls crowning every post of the stockade. The self-declared emperor of the Central African Empire, Jean Bedel Bokassa, was tried on October 24, 1986 for several cases of cannibalism, although he was never convicted. Between April 17th and April 19, 1979, a number of elementary school students were arrested after they had protested against wearing the expensive government-required school uniforms. Around 100 were killed. Bokassa is said to have participated in the massacre, beating some of the children to death with his cane, and allegedly ate some of his victims. Cannibalism has been reported in several recent African conflicts, including the Second Congo War and the civil wars in Liberia and Sierra Leone. A UN human rights expert reported in July 2007 that sexual atrocities against Congolese women go far beyond rape and include sexual slavery, forced incest, and cannibalism. This may be done in desperation, as during peacetime cannibalism is much less frequent. At other times it is consciously directed at certain groups believed to be relatively helpless, such as Congo pygmies, even considered subhuman by other Congolese. It is also reported by some that witch doctors sometimes use the body parts of children in their medicine. Reports of widespread cannibalism began to emerge from North Korea during the famine of the 1990s and subsequent ongoing starvation. Kim Jong-il was reported to have ordered a crackdown on cannibalism in 1996. Chinese travelers reported in 1998 that cannibalism had occurred. 3 people in North Korea were reported to have been executed for selling or eating human flesh in 2006. Further reports of cannibalism emerged in early 2013, including reports of a man executed for killing his 2 children for food.